Okay, hi everybody. So we were working with the idea of trying to build a structure that families can go to when they are starting out or are somewhere along the process with child protective services. In Illinois, that's known as DCFS. It's an acronym you'll hear us say a lot. To give you an idea of who we are and work, I'm Kaitlin Ramsey. I am a domestic violence advocate with Sarazin. We're not a shelter, but we do work with DV survivors in the metro area all the time.
I'm Shira Hammann. I work for a company called Creativity. I'm a software consultant in the .NET space most of the time. And we also had a couple folks who were part of our team. Have you given their full names?
Yes, Lauren Miller, also an advocate. She's at court, whereas I'm sort of everywhere else but at court through Metropolitan Family Services, excuse me. Sally Kolb is an attorney with Land of Lincoln, so she was a huge resource to us because she works in 14 downstate counties. So could talk a little bit more about the process is substantially different when you have less services, less options available once you get out of Cook County. And James Champlin, who is also an attorney, but at the Chicago courthouse, domestic violence courthouse, through Domestic Violence Legal Clinic. And then
I'm Gwen. I'm the technical director at Illinois Legal Aid Online.
So what our goal was to have basically a flow chart that individuals could plug into wherever they were in the process and get more information about what would be coming next, about what might be important next steps to take. Our ultimate goal is to have pros, cons, and options for a variety of different things that might occur. So something that happens in a decent number of DCFS cases is that someone other than you made a phone call and reported that you were neglectful or you were abusive to your children, or that your partner was. And that always happens, that someone makes a call, oftentimes it's someone else. And you don't know about it until somebody's knocking on your door saying, I want to come talk to you and your kids. And that moment is terrifying and confusing, right? But more so for a domestic violence victim who may not be safe to tell everything that's happening. And as we've learned over time, unfortunately, the very fact of them being a victim can put them at more risk of their children being taken away from them, sometimes even taken away from them and given to their abuser who has been perpetrating violence against them. And what we wanted, like I said, we wanted to have something that they could plug into at any moment in this process. I'm trying to make sure I have everything that we want to say. So we start at the very beginning. Can we go to the
site?
Yeah, site. What we've created starts you at the very beginning. You have the ability to talk. If you think somebody called DCFS on you, you have the ability to think through what are the first steps, second steps, third steps I might want to take. And we talk through a couple of ideas. Even more primary than that, which is why it's higher on the screen, if you are in an emergency right now, right this second, anytime, you know that you've got the resources here. And we always have an escape hatch. Most sites that serve DV folks do have an escape hatch of some kind. Ours takes you to weather.com so that if your abuser's looking over your shoulder, you can get out quickly and easily. And then if you could scroll down for me, Gwen. So talks you through things you can do if you think someone called DCFS on you, and if DCFS is called but the report wasn't taken. One thing that sometimes happens is a victim will call because their abuser has been doing something abusive to the children, and they would rather call DCFS than call the police. And it talks you through if you called, if someone else has called, but the report wasn't taken, what might happen? And if somebody told you they called DCFS, it tells you, hey, you can still use this flowchart. So going up the flowchart, we actually started it at, did an investigator Did an investigator visit your home, and did that report that they took, or the evidence that they gathered, did that result in someone being found indicated or founded for abuse or neglect? This is the point at which we expect most people to start interacting with our flowchart. Basically, an investigator comes to your home, and unless they find some evidence of abuse or neglect, they just close the case, usually in 60 days. And it tells us what happens if they close the case, if we click. So here's one particular case that we wanted to emphasize for folks. If, like I said before, if you call DCFS on your abuser and the investigation led to a finding of not indicated, what happens next? Because you've put yourself at risk, right? They were talked to by DCFS. What can you do? You can appeal. You have other options. We sort of lay them out. Ultimately, our goal, although it's not here, would be for those other options to link to other websites. One example might be, this is a good opportunity to go to a domestic violence agency. Another would be this, you could go to shelter if you're in danger because of this, etc. Heading back into the flowchart. Something else that we wanted to put in is the idea, are scrollovers. So basically, a lot of terms that have to do with DCFS are confusing, and we wanted this to be accessible to a really broad range of audience, and folks that have the lowest level of internet use knowledge. So one of the things we tried to do was have mouse over text so that if a term would be unfamiliar, especially if it would be really important going forward, you could get a refresher. What does this mean? Or get a first introduction to what does this mean. Am I missing anything? Could you show the photos, Gwen?
Yeah, the best one.
So what we want to show you is what we started from, or what we came from. And it was basically, as Gwen and Shira were putting together the foundation for what became this flowchart, those of us who work directly with victims were talking about what does a DCFS case look like? Bare bones, furthest out view that you can get with before any complicating factors. And what we did was draw a big old tree of this, if this then that, if this then that, all the way out. Nothing like this exists right now, accessible to someone who's in the DCFS process. It took the four of us, probably together, we've got 35 or 40 years of working with victims to make sure that we had at least a good place to start with, because it's a complex, confusing process with lots of moving parts at baseline before you bring anything else into it. That is what we gave Gwen and Shira to work with in creating this tree or this flowchart. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. So the site is hosted in Drupal. Gwen put up a site out on Acquia for this. And we did talk about possibilities for a permanent home. Acquia would be a temporary home for development. One of the things that needs to be considered is having an agency that would take ownership, or not necessarily an agency, but an organization that would take ownership. And preferably, it would need to be an organization that had independence, because what we're putting on this site is, while it's not advice, it does provide information. What are some of the negative things that might happen if you take a particular action? What are some of the positive things that might happen? And different agencies may have interests in those positives and negatives. So it has to be an independent organization. What was the name of the organization we were thinking about contacting?
We've got two in mind. One is the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center, which serves a lot of people in a DCFS process. Another is potentially Illinois Legal Aid Online, which is the agency Gwen works for. Someone else has referenced it, the last group referenced it as one of the major sources for the layperson to get legal information, but not advice, in Cook County and potentially in all of Illinois. And the idea that this might be hosted by them was one of the major advantages to it as a project for us, because it has it can link into services that already exist. And not only that, exist for a very broad spectrum of people. Many, many people know this organization.
And we put this up as a Drupal site in part because our organization will be on Drupal, also because it's free and easy to use. In fact, Kaitlin, we gave her a login and she started writing all the content this afternoon with no technical expertise. I didn't even have a WYSIWYG editor installed for her. I had to send her some HTML snippets and she started putting it in. The flowchart is using a jQuery plugin that we found. It's not perfect, still needs some work to get it to do all the things that we would want it to do. But an end vision for this, though, would be to take that jQuery plugin library and build a front end on it so that anybody could build a flowchart and throw it up on a website.
Yeah, and this is
So,
something we were surprised to find didn't seem to exist in the way we figured we'd go out there, find it, and it would be there. Okay, WYSIWYG, I want to add a little, the same thing as Visio, only for an HTML website, and yes, you can have link, and we found some things like it, but you couldn't put a link on the triangle, or you couldn't do things that were fundamental that you'd want to do. So that's something, we haven't developed our own here because we didn't have time in 2 days, but that would be really useful both for this site and for many, many other sites.